Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sham, Salim, co-founder of Aslam Sham Architects, here representing our team. I'm sorry to have to present at this time when the lunch is kicking in for all of you, so I'll try to keep it very short. So, Aslam Sham Architects, we're based out of Calicut. And before I get into the detailed presentation, I would like, of the project that is shortlisted here, I would like to give you a brief context of how we got there. Sorry, yeah. So, when we founded our firm back in 2015, we obviously, due to our financial limitations and whatever little experience we had, we also went ahead and got a small commercial space right in the middle of the city. It was a small 200 square feet place, and where every morning we had to fight for a parking lot in the commercial space and all of that. So once we were, moderately settled in 3 years and we wanted to move out to a new space, our prime focus was to get to a space where we have enough peace, mental peace, where we could think, we could breathe, we basically where we didn't have to hear honking every 10 seconds. So somewhere we could find some mental space. That is, sorry, yeah. So that got us to this place, which is, sorry, I hope the time limits are being recorded for this, yeah. It's a PDF അല്ലേ? നേരത്തെ try ചെയ്തിരുന്നു. You tried it earlier, right? It was no issue. Nothing, just a PDF. So yeah. It's a PDF. I don't think there is any setting in it. So why is it continuously sliding? I hope we can continue in one go from now. So from this thick urban context, we basically replanted our office into this context where it was slightly more towards in a rural setting, which was about 10 minutes away from the city. So accessibility wise, it was not too hard to get to for us as well. And when we reached here, our what we found was this. So although it was a typical early concrete building that came up in the state, we kind of really liked the idea of having the freedom of the land, right? So we had around a 30-cent plot around this. So what Aslam and myself liked the most was the fact that there was enough land to play around with, because we basically wanted a space where we could get into. Maybe it was down to the fact that we really didn't have any in the office before and we really wanted a space, something like that. So how do we transform this into a commercially viable office space which could satisfy all of our functional requirements, but at the same time, it could also satisfy our, what you call, aspirational requirements, if you could call it that, right? So that was the key. And when we started out thinking about the project, our whole thought process basically was rooted or redefined from how to adapt this building, right? So we started thinking about how to adaptively reuse the building, how to upcycle the building, how to repurpose its existing, functionalities that were originally designed into something entirely different to what it was originally thought of when it was built. So from that root thought, we kind of derived our design language for the building, or how it evolved as well. We felt like we could, have a little bit of fun since it's our own office, and we could, we didn't have to satisfy anyone else's requirements or something like that. So how can we translate that core ethos of adaptive use or upcycling or repurposing functions for things that were originally designed for something else into something entirely new? That plus our basic design ethics or languages which we already have of how we needed the spaces to be continuous, how we like our office to have this constant communication between multiple people, and because we don't like to segment people into rooms and hierarchies or things like that, because it's a very continuously working office, and we do like to keep it as informal as possible, because ourselves we find it very hard to function in an office which has too much structure. So our office, when we evolved also, the layout kind of evolved in the same manner. So just to give you a breakdown of how the process evolved, even the office development which you showed now, which I showed now, has also actually evolved in two phases. Initially, we were around 5 to 10 people in staff. So the first image is what we originally found there. And it was a typical layout of house which had a veranda and a small room which was accessible from the veranda, and a central foyer which attached to two bedrooms on either sides, and then a kitchen block and a storeroom on the side, and a rear, what you call as chaip in Malayalam, a small shed kind of an area that was attached to the rear as an afterthought. Right. So what we did was, we basically wanted to make these spaces continuous. But then, due to the limitations of the building being an old structure and its own structural limitations, we couldn't make it fully open. So what we did was, we removed those walls marked yellow. We demolished those walls and added steel beams and columns to make the space continuous and one single space. So the image 3 was our office, which was there around 3 years back. In that, the side longer room on the side is basically where mine and Aslam's tables were, and the remaining space continuously became a staff cabin. But then there was no door in between, and we kept the opening as wide as possible so that it still had maintained that openness. But then, probably due to luck or bad luck, the office grew more than what we expected it to grow in 2 years, and we had to instantly upscale and adapt to the required purpose. So that is when we felt that we had to be more farsighted about things, and that's when I think the project that we are going to now evolved. So we kind of try to expand the in-between spaces and the outdoors a little bit more, because we do try to go and sit out and discuss, because a lot of the designs are evolved with discussions and interactions, and that plays a very key part in our process. So rather than focusing on the inside and the cubicles and how the tables are laid out, we also wanted to focus on how we can create these multiple spaces where we can interact and have these conversations which are not entirely formal also, because often we may be having an informal conversation which could end up leading to something about a project and something like that. So this on the image 5 is what the final layout is it to be. We added an entire skin outside the existing structure by taking out the face of the building. We kind of repurposed old windows and doors to make this facade, which is kind of a humorous take on reusing or upcycling buildings. Because we were using these windows and doors as building blocks here instead of how they are originally supposed to be. But because of their porous nature, it also adds a functional element in the manner that it adds a certain play of light into the space inside. And this is the site layout where you have the entry from the topmost corner, and we basically use the front yard as the guest or the client parking, and our staff and employee parking happens at the rear of the site. And you have so this is the detailed layout, and there's a front foyer space where you have the bell where somebody who's visiting comes and rings, because we generally don't entertain visitors who are unannounced. So somebody who's randomly coming in would have no idea where the entry of the building is going to be, because all of our meetings or appointments or whatever is taken beforehand, and so whenever they come, we'll be ready to receive them. So somebody who's coming in unannounced would end up at the front, initial foyer space, and they would have to ring a bell and somebody would come out and greet them. And the space marked 1 is now the discussion or informal room, which is kind of like a multi-purpose storage room, or informal discussions, games room and all of that, which was initially the meeting room in the phase 1 of the office. And then you have the areas marked 2, which are the workstations, which houses around 10 to 12 staff, depending on how crowded we are at the moment. And then you have the area marked as 4, which is the pantry, and a staff toilet at marked 5. And then we have this outdoor space, which is marked 9, which is basically what I was talking to you about as the informal interaction spaces, which connects you to the next block which we built, because these are all plinths that existed in the site, because it was harder to get permissions in that site. So we had to play around with the existing plinths and how to repurpose the same into multiple spaces. And area marked 6 is where currently we partners sit, but it's mostly during meetings or some sort of a serious discussions when we go and sit there. Other times, normally we are floating around in area 2 itself. And area marked 7 is the formal boardroom where we do the client presentations and when we have to use the screen to show projects to the client. Now, this is just a sequential arrangement of how the project was evolved. So initially, what we did was we opened up the existing openings. Mostly, we made them entire floor height so that we could take more light in. This is the front facade of the building, which was slightly brought out as a new skin. And this is how the walls were demolished by keeping telescopic probes all around and before adding the steel structures to add about it. The front window was kind of blocked because we didn't want somebody from the road to directly have visibility into the office. This is just different stages of the project, how there's a water body through which you enter into the project and how it was done. That's the window facade which you see was built along that skin. And again, side photos. Actually, on the left side of the area where we currently have our informal interaction space, initially it was a deck space where we had tried using these old window shutters as a flooring deck material. But again, like I said, there's a lot of trial and error involved, and this was definitely error because the windows couldn't take structural load that way, and it was kind of falling off after getting wet for a couple of seasons. So we kind of chucked that in phase 2 and we made it a stone area. This is basically how it evolved. And this is the final, how we have reached over. And I will just go through the images. That's the entrance foyer space which I told you about, where somebody can ring a bell and somebody would come out and greet them. So this is the secondary entry into the office. You have a tertiary entry for the staff on the left side as well. And this is the informal interaction space which connects the old and the comparatively newer block. And we basically reused these multiple windows and wood roofing tiles, all of those sourced from multiple demolished buildings, so that we kind of felt that it kind of fell in sync with what we're doing with the project. So it was not just an aesthetic choice, but more of, we felt like conceptually it's synced with what we're doing with the project. And it's also, we tried to focus on these, imperfections, and like we feel things don't have to be perfect to be aesthetic or beautiful or functional. We feel like things can age gracefully, and there's a beauty in things aging gracefully and how charming they can get. So again, more images of the same. This is how the indoor and the outdoor workspaces connect. You can just open and they seamlessly interact. These are the workstation cubicles. The pin-up boards, I'm sorry, but I mean, they are mostly used for pinning up informal situations that happened in the office, or like more of trolls and memes than printouts of drawings these days in our office for some reason. But they're there, but they're being used how the team wants it to be used. This is the front room which you see from the entry of the site. That discussion table is something that can change into a carom table as well. I have a small video of the project. The rear office has been treated as, can you play the video please? So there is more of colors and character that has been brought into the rear space, because it's more of a space where we go to ideate, or where we go to have these creative spark discussions. But on a regular basis, we didn't want the space to have too much loud elements or colors, so that it doesn't feel too loud to your ears. But then at the same time, the audio please. So the whole idea was to have these kind of spaces which sort of mix the landscape, the entire landscape development, how the site evolved, the plans, how the greens evolved, all were planned by us, because you could see how the site was in the initial stage. This is the water body over which the entry of the site works. And that's the facade with the repurposed windows, and like I said, like you can see how the wood ages. We don't really want to keep the wood polished or like perfect all the time. We feel it is nice to see it age gracefully with weathering and all of that. This is the rear partner's cabin, which has more of color and vibrance to it, where we mostly go for these client meetings as well as some ideation meetings at the beginning of a project. We have tried to show the age of the building by taking off the plasters in some walls, because the laterite stones that you see here are from the old generation, which were much smaller in nature compared to the machine cut blocks which come now. So we wanted to pay homage to that character as well. So this is how I said how the interior and the outdoor can seamlessly interact with each other, and because discussions form such a crucial part of our design process that we have to, in an ideal world we would have liked a complete open office, but since our practice constantly tries to make the best of what is available, we feel this office kind of completely encapsulates that element of ours, and how we try to use these vernacular elements, but not in the typical expected manner, but in a manner in which it is contemporary in nature, but then in the first glance it feels a bit very vernacular as well. PPT.
Let's start the question and answer session.
I didn't have the presentation. I just had the entire team's picture at the last slide, so that's all.
Thank you for the presentation. So this is the third architect's office I'm seeing.
Yes.
So I love all of them. So is somebody wanting to hire me? I'll come and stay. I'm in such beautiful spaces. No? But that really also is provoking some questions which are not just for you. I think there's a much larger question in my mind that has come. What does this word commerce really then mean?
Sorry?
What does this word commerce and commercial mean in relation to being an architect? And in relation to being an architect, does commercial mean that there is an interaction with somebody who is other than yourself, who is a client, and the nature of that client's requirement of you is a space in which something transactional occurs? Okay? And I think Champaka was also at some point referring to it. And somewhere along the line, I am a little bit skeptical, and maybe this is for the organizers or for all of us. Two things here, two questions that come to my mind. One, that in early modernism, with the Johnson Wax office, and then with the Hertz Behir, two very distinct shifts, spatial shifts in commercial spaces were seen. One, of course, is this one large, humongous, singular space that we, over a period of time, took in many different directions. And two, interactive spaces where people communicated with each other as integrating social space within a workspace. Okay? Post-pandemic, maybe many people and many offices are forced to rethink what it means as a workspace. What is a workspace? Is the workspace getting redefined to be much closer to what seems to be a residential space? Or in which case, or is it, there is this whole concept of third space, a space which is between residence and work. So is the workspace, I'm sorry.
I still didn't get to answer a question yet, so.
Does the commercial space start actually negotiating this whole idea of what is a home space and what is a workspace? If through these three examples, bear with me, it's a little complicated conversation in my mind I'm having. If we are doing that, isn't it our responsibility to demonstrate this kind of a space to be done for somebody else and not ourselves? Because I can do anything for myself. It only gets validation as a larger idea when I see it getting accepted as a larger idea by other people. So if you would have shown me the Google building as incorporating some of these ideas as a precedent to what you're trying to do, maybe I will make those connections. But I don't see them as much as we would like to celebrate. It's a bigger question that is coming to my mind after seeing these four presentations.
Building on Meghal, I'll be brief. Your office, architecture of your office is representative of adaptive reuse. Meghal asked a question about how the idea of commerce and home and office comes together in your practice. I'm asking you a related question, that how does the idea of adaptive reuse manifest in your practice itself when you offer your services to other clients? How does the idea of adaptive reuse and adaptive reuse being synonymous with sustainability, how does that reflect in your practice itself? You don't have to answer it right now, but it's a bigger question too.
The questions are something that have an immediate answer, but I think it needs content.
Alex, so how many minutes do I get to answer these questions? So I'm going to just try and as compressed as possible, because I sense the person sitting there is staring at me for taking up too much time. So, like ma'am said, it's the bridge, I mean, the gap or the gulf between commercial and office space is, diluting a lot. But then for us, I wouldn't say it was a post-pandemic thing. From the beginning, our office has always been about interaction and openness and continuity. So even the 250 square feet space we had before, there was no walls. It was just one continuous hall where we had a table, staff had a table, that's it. So we've always tried to stay close to the people. It's a very informal office. Everybody knows everything about everyone. So that gulf or the gap between home and commercial space, that thing has never been there for us. So I'll put that aside from the offset. But how the commercials work or how such a space works for us viably is basically, I would say, maybe having such a space and having space to interact and being calmer with each other or being more relaxed and having such an interactive space indirectly encourages the team to perform better, or maybe you indirectly increases their productivity. So because I would say as an office of strength with around 10 people dealing projects of around 40 to 50, at the scale we are doing, we feel we are being very efficient with our work, but then we don't do night outs, we don't sit late, we have a 2-day weekend off. So I feel if you give enough time for the mind to rest, you just need a much smaller time to get the work done the remaining time, because you end up being more productive. So that's always been a core thing, and this is not something we are trying to profess or something. It is just how myself and Aslam had been comfortable working in, like we work better and we are relaxed. So we just felt that philosophy could translate further and maybe it could be adapted to more people.
Sorry to just cut you short, but my problem is that when I walk out of the city, I just see very banal buildings all over the city.
Yeah.
So what we say for ourselves is not reflected outside in the 95% of the things we are building.
So that is what we are trying to showcase in our project, so that
then
more people sign
then
up.
show me a project which is not your office. That's my point.
I could if I was allowed to, but I think I'm
Allowed to, you have to
supposed
send
to
in
show,
an entry.
Supposed to show just this project.
No,
and
you
so-
were supposed to send in an entry for a commercial project.
No, but then there was no other entry space for an office
Ah,
space
so
as
that's
well.
what I'm
right?
saying. No,
so that
so
is,
that is
I
where
think it's a
exactly
question
my
down to
point.
the organizers than to
That
the
is exactly my point,
participants.
that there was no other project. Anyways, I think she's going to glare at me also.
Also, regarding just adding on to the last portion of your question regarding how adaptive reuse translates into a practice. So, how this project encapsulates our practice is not just about the adaptive reuse part, but we have done projects of adaptive reuse in nature also. We have converted a tile factory into an event space. So, we like doing things and into multiple purposes. But then it's also about the point I was trying to stress on is how we like to make the best out of the situation that is put in hand. Because often as architects, we have the habit of being very frustrated when things are not done ideally, or things are not done perfectly, or things are not done exactly how we want it. So we always say when the client comes to us with, people come from diverse backgrounds, completely different upbringing. So their requirements would be very different. So how we can adapt that and make the best of that and combine our ethics into it is what we try to do as a practice. And here, basically, the project spoke to us in a manner that we felt adaptive reuse and how the direction which we took was the best way to solve that, and that's what we try to do with it. That's all. Thank you for taking up too much.